they can't write, then still showing them that process can be a helpful way to prepare them for later grades maybe. So that's something that I did. But yeah, it's a very fun grade to work with, I think. Yes?
I'm along here too. I have second graders, and the thing that I've noticed about them in writing is they want to write and they have a lot of great ideas, but spelling is a major roadblock. So, like with the younger grades, I mean, I don't know what everybody else does, but I always tell them not to worry about their spelling, to just spell the best way they know how, and like by telling them that, it really gets them to just keep going and to not stop. So.
Yes, and I think that that's one of the things that actually for me, when I was at that age, when I was writing longhand and I was like, one problem I had was that I would say didn't, like D-I-D-N'-T, but I would always spell it like didn't, D-I-N-T, and my mom would correct me again and again, and I think that some of those spelling errors can really be a roadblock, like fear of, is this right, is this wrong, and it can kind of stop the creative process, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why computer helped me was because of the spell check. But also, yeah, definitely kind of breaking the rules and not focusing so much on conventions can sort of free kids from that fear. Yeah, so not being as afraid of that is an important thing.
I think she's wondering about how they don't do the same thing over and over.
Yeah,
address that. Technology does help.
Yeah, technology does help. For me, when I was using the spell check, then it allowed me to kind of check it independently. And when I saw the correct spelling, then that kind of stuck with me. Now you have to maybe go over something with the kids. But what would be a fun activity that I like to do sometimes? For let me insert a new page. So I might type up this passage. I went over to my friend's house. It was cold outside, but we played with the water hose anyway. Okay, so obviously there are some errors in writing here, and so maybe having a student come up and finding them and circling them maybe would apply to kind of the tactile learning. So having this kind of interactive activity might help as well. So there are quite a few different ways maybe going over with kids about that. Yes?
Have you read your books? Like, have you read all of them?
Have I read my own books was the question? Yes, actually. My mom is always laughing because sometimes I'll read Flying Fingers and she'll be like, you know what's going to happen, why are you so interested? But I think it's kind of the same reason that we reread books, even though we know what's happening next, it's still interesting, and even though I wrote it, it's still kind of interesting to read it. In fact, it's sometimes a little more interesting because when I'm actually just writing it, I'm not really going to read over it, so reading over it after it's published is a fun experience. Yes?
Have you found an average norm at which an age of kids can actually use the technology adequately? I have a fourth grader who is trying to do typing, but unfortunately sometimes their hands aren't big enough on the keyboards, nor do they have the grasp of knowing where all the letters are. So what's your advice on the age break of when kids can adequately use technology to do creative writing versus writing longhand?
Well, that is a good question. For me, when I was 6 years old, I had no problem with using a computer, but I did have a lot of previous exposure. I did have like typing CDs that I was working with. If students, I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be that kids are able to type, but just maybe starting out with some exposure, like maybe having a computer and a projector and an active board, and showing students the process, getting them familiar with it. I think that as 21st century students, a lot of people have grown up maybe seeing computers. Whether or not the typing skills are adequate is something, if the school has maybe a typing class, or being able to show students that it does, I think it really does depend on whether they've had typing before. But laptops, for instance, the keys are usually fairly small and you're able to type pretty easily. But that's kind of an interesting question. I found that around we see that a lot of kids have cell phones nowadays. And so that would be an example of exposure to technology. And so probably even kids who are 10 years old, 9 years old, have probably had some kind of exposure to technology and will be able to handle it. Yes?
I was just going to comment on that. I'm observing a third grade classroom right now at a school, and the students have a set of MacBooks that are usually in the room. They're on them all, like every time I'm in there, they're up using the active board, doing like daily fix-its and stuff. So I just found that really interesting. It's not really a question that I had to ask, but that as young as third grade, they know how to work. I have no idea. I'd never really seen one before I was in the classroom. So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of kids, especially those who've had previous exposure to technology, are kind of digital natives. And I think that there is no set age that kids are better or worse at technology. It just has a lot to do with variables like exposure to technology, whether use of technology is encouraged. So it's I would start gradually, but definitely there aren't really limits as to what you can do.
I can maybe address that a little bit. You have the Dragon naturally speaking software, so you also have talking software that you can